Appalachia, the $15 trillion battery that no one can access. The drills are silent, gates are chained. Under 13 states of Appalachia, a $15 trillion battery sits locked, enough strategic value to tilt supply chains, defense, and the energy transition. The stakes aren't abstract: magnets for missiles, motors for EVs, turbines for wind. It's all here and somehow out of reach. The lie? That America lacks the minerals. The truth lives in waste piles and orange streams, blocked by laws, legacy pollution, and foreign leverage that sets the price from 7,000 miles away. 3 shocks in 5 minutes, then the reveal of who profits. To understand why the battery is offline, we need to go back fast. The battery nobody can reach. Draw a line from northern Alabama through Kentucky and West Virginia into Pennsylvania. That spine, Appalachia, once sent coal to every corner of American industry. Today, the same hills, the same hollows hide something different: a dispersed reservoir of rare earths and critical minerals embedded in coal ash, acid mine drainage, and waste rock. It's not a single motherlode, it's a patchwork battery. When people hear battery, they think lithium. Here the charge is different: neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium, elements that turn electricity into motion and signals into focus. They sit in motors, missile fins, sonar arrays, precision actuators, and the magnets that make wind turbines hum. Without them, the clean energy build-out stutters, the defense industrial base hesitates, and manufacturing loses its nerve. Look at the mismatch. Demand curves for EVs, wind, data centers, and defense all bend upward. The US calls rare earths critical, then imports magnets and oxides shaped by someone else's rules. Meanwhile, in counties where coal jobs vanished, the ground itself holds the pieces of a domestic fix. Here's shock number 1. The waste streams in coal country aren't waste at all. Appalachian coal-related materials have recorded rare earth concentrations as high as 4,100 parts per million, orders of magnitude that move projects from interesting to commercially viable when the midstream exists. Median coal ash concentrations around this basin sit far above other US regions. The feedstock is here. But there's a choke, and it isn't geology. The moment a company tries to test, touch, or move this material, it enters a maze. Exploration authorizations, overlapping federal and state jurisdictions, baseline water studies, and consultations that can stall over a patch of seasonal wetland. Permits trigger bonds, bonds trigger risk models trigger lawyers. What was supposed to be cleanup with co-products starts to look, on paper, like a brand new mine, complete with decades of potential liability. We'll get to the legal padlock, but hold that thought. Because while paperwork gathers dust, prices don't. Someone else sets them. China dominates the separation and processing steps, the midstream where raw concentrates become oxides, metals, and magnets. That control isn't just market share, it's timing. Any sign of US activity can be met with a price swing that turns bankable projects into cautionary tales. If Appalachia ships concentrate abroad for processing, the leverage stays abroad. If it can't ship at all, the leverage is total. Now step into the hollers, and the battery looks stranger and smarter. Acid mine drainage, the rust-colored water that stains creek beds, naturally concentrates these elements. The iron-rich precipitates that treatment plants pull out can hold rare earths in meaningful amounts. Coal ash at power plant ponds carries even more. These are pre-processed streams. They've already been pulverized by geology and industry. That matters because cost curves are cruel. Grinding, leaching, and concentrating from fresh rock eat time and money. Remining waste and treating water bends the curve. So why doesn't it happen at scale? Because the first turn of the flywheel needs proof and policy to meet in the middle. The proof exists in pilot projects, lab benches that moved into skid-mounted units, then into pilot facilities that captured rare earths from AMD while cleaning water. Engineers ran solvent extraction trains, tweaked pH windows, and produced concentrates that didn't just look good on paper. They met numbers you can ship. But pilots are not markets. They whisper what's possible. They don't guarantee that banks will listen. Meanwhile, local people live with the past daily. A school board stares at a shrinking tax base. A water authority budgets for perpetual treatment. A county commissioner hears from a cousin whose well went bad in 1986 and doesn't want to risk it again. Trust, is a ledger written in lived memory. To earn it, any project has to produce wins you can see, jobs you can count, streams that run clear, revenue that shows up before election day, without asking the community to carry tail risks they can't insure. Here's the quiet economic pivot. The battery isn't one mine, one pit, one shaft. It's a network of small and mid-sized feedstock points, coal ash ponds, gob piles, AMD plants, each with its own chemistry and permit history. String them together with a midstream that sits within trucking distance, and the math starts to stabilize. Lose the midstream, and you're back to exporting opportunity or shelving it entirely. One more number to keep in your head. At scale, existing Appalachian waste streams could yield around 800 tons of rare earth elements annually. That doesn't replace global supply. It does move a domestic needle, especially for heavy rare earths that defense buyers obsess over. Combine that with remediation credits and water quality gains, and the unit economics shift from speculative to service plus metals. The battery charges while the watershed heals. But there's a catch baked into the rules. Companies that try to turn waste into resource can inherit yesterday's sins. Permits written for coal extraction weren't built for remining waste with modern separators. Insurance underwriters price the unknown like a storm that never ends. Even when a county wants the tax base, one procedural objection can freeze a season. The message on the ground is simple: touch this the wrong way, and you own it forever. That's the tension at the heart of Appalachia's locked battery. Geology says go, chemistry says ready, communities say prove it, and the rulebook says wait. While it waits, a foreign processor taps the market barometer and everyone else shivers. The real lock isn't underground, it's written into the rules. The legal padlock. To understand the lock, start with the promise. A remining crew plans to scoop iron sludge from an old treatment pond, pull out rare earths, and leave the water cleaner than they found it. They map the site, test the chemistry, and line up a buyer for a small oxide stream. Then the first letter arrives: prepare a NEPA review. NEPA is simple in spirit. Know what you're about to do, weigh alternatives, disclose impacts. In practice, it's a clock. Draft assessments, public comment, responses, maybe an environmental impact statement if any agency thinks the footprint or controversy merits it. Months turn to years while consultants model seasonal flows and migratory birds. Meanwhile, something else kicks in. If the site touches coal legacies, SMCRA shows up, the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. SMCRA was written to stop the damage coal once did and make operators clean up. It demands bonds big enough to cover reclamation if a company walks away. That's reasonable for an active mine, but for remining waste or treating acid mine drainage, it triggers a trap. Touch legacy material, and you might inherit legacy liability, subsidence you didn't cause, drainage you didn't start, and long-term water treatment you never planned to fund. Insurers read that risk and step back. Banks follow. Here's how the 5-stop gauntlet feels on the ground. Step 1. Exploration. You request access to test coal ash, gob, or AMD sludge. A landowner signs, but a mineral rights holder objects. A state agency asks for water baselines from 2 wet seasons. Step 2. Permitting. Your waste-to-resource proposal straddles categories: solid waste at the pond, water discharge at the treatment plant, mining if you disturb spoil, industrial processing if you build a small concentrator. Each path has different paperwork, different clocks, and different veto points. Step 3. Bonding. Even if you propose to leave the site cleaner, the bond assumes worst case. It prices a perpetual pump-and-treat scenario with inflation and escalators. Your finance model absorbs a number that belongs to the last century's mess. Step 4. Litigation. A coalition files for an injunction, citing the Clean Water Act and potential impacts to 70 feet of seasonal wetlands that form after heavy spring rains. Your engineers propose micrositing pumps around it. The case still moves. Step 5. Appeals. If you survive the first round, there's another. Each pause drains project time value. Minerals obey markets. An 8-year delay can flip a viable net present value to negative, especially when the midstream you need might not exist by the time you break ground. Here's the micro story. A pilot team in a coal county proposes a small AMD unit next to an existing treatment outfall. Their plan: capture the iron precipitate, recover rare earths with a 2-stage leach and solvent extraction train, and return treated water that meets tighter standards than the permit requires. County commissioners like it, new tax base, water cleanup, jobs. Then a field survey maps a narrow seasonal wetland ribbon across the planned access road. The Corps flags it. An alternatives analysis stretches 6 months. A neighboring landowner, worried about traffic and dust, joins a suit. The plant never moves dirt that year. Vendor quotes expire. The bond estimate rises because the schedule did. By winter, an insurer adds an exclusion for legacy drainage attribution. The pilot goes quiet. This is the NEPA, SMCRA bonding trap. It wasn't designed to punish cleanup plus extraction. It just wasn't designed for it at all. Under CRCLA and the Clean Water Act, joint and several liability hangs over any release tied to a site. Even if you prevent more pollution than you cause, if your name touches the chain, you can be named. Good Samaritan proposals have floated for years to shield cleanup actors, but comprehensive protection stalled. So companies that want to pull value from waste are told, if anything goes wrong, or even if it doesn't, you might own the past. What nobody knew at the time these rules were drafted was that coal's leftovers would become critical mineral feedstock. Lawmakers wrote for shovels and seams, not centrifuges and membranes. Now, remining a gob pile for rees can be treated like opening a mine, not closing a chapter. Regulators aren't villains here. Their mandate is clear: prevent new harm, but the toolset is blunt. A permit system that assumes extraction is the hazard can't easily credit remediation as the core value. Meanwhile, legal delay is a strategy. Opponents don't need to win on the merits if they can stretch the timeline until capital dries up. Procedural challenges to comment periods, traffic studies, or discharge modeling keep the clock running. Each extension forces a new season of sampling, a new round of public meetings, a new set of expert reports. The project's burn rate doesn't pause. Local patience thins. Shock number 2 lands here. Reprocessing mine waste faces many of the same hurdles as breaking new ground. The intent is different. The paperwork is. And in a market ruled by a faraway processor, time is the sharpest weapon. A price dip during year 3 of permitting can spook lenders. A sudden export control abroad can spike prices, but you can't capture the upside if you're not allowed to move. There's a way through, but it requires categories that don't yet exist. Permit-like pathways for waste reprocessing with tighter discharge caps and clearer Good Samaritan shields. Federal backstop bonds that wall off legacy liabilities from new actors. Until then, the legal padlock stays shut. While papers stack up, another power writes the price. The processing monopoly. While permits stall in courthouse file rooms, another choke point waits down the road. Mining isn't the profit node anymore. Processing is. The place where muddy concentrate becomes clean oxides, where oxides become metals, and metals become magnets. That's where margins, leverage, and power live. And that midstream is mostly somewhere else. In the United States, we still know how to dig. We can sample coal ash ponds and pull iron sludge from acid mine drainage. We can produce a mixed rare earth concentrate. But the next leap, separating 15 chemically similar elements into high-purity streams, belongs to a system built overseas. China didn't just scale production, it built muscle memory in solvent extraction, ion exchange, and downstream magnet fabrication. It owns the timing that scares investors here. Here's how the gap feels on a balance sheet. Say a team in Appalachia produces a 2.5% mixed rare earth concentrate from AMD sludge. It's a start, but without a domestic separator, that concentrate has to travel across oceans into a facility that sets the toll, the schedule, and the purity specs. The buyer can discount for every uncertainty: trace thorium, calcium carryover, iron contamination, variable feed chemistry. And if a US separator tries to open, the price shuffle begins. Price cycles in this sector aren't gentle, they're tactical. When a Western project announces financing, global prices slide. When a facility goes offline abroad, prices pop. The signal is clear: try to stand up a domestic midstream, and you'll be greeted with undercutting that erodes bankability. Lenders know this story. They watched it play out in solar, aluminium, and steel. The fear isn't geology, it's a price war timed to your loan covenants. Meanwhile, there's the tacit knowledge problem. Solvent extraction, the workhorse for rare earth separation, isn't just tanks and acids. It's an art of phase behavior, mixer-settler train tuning, organic degradation management, and bleed stream control. It's keeping tiny impurities from shadowing heavy rare earths you need for magnets. Engineers can design the plant, but the first 2 years are where you learn the plant, the quirks that don't show up in process flow diagrams. That's the moat. Then there's the geography of risk. If Appalachia ships concentrate abroad, it locks in dependence at the most fragile link. Export controls on gallium and germanium were a reminder. The switch can flip overnight. The same lever can touch rare earths, magnet alloys, or the machine tools that shape them. A mine without a local separator isn't supply security. It's an upstream input waiting on a foreign calendar. Defense spending tries to bridge the gap. The Defense Production Act can throw tens or hundreds of millions at pilot separators, metal plants, even magnet lines. And that's moving. Awards have landed, test runs begun. But defense volumes don't match commercial volumes, and the offtake profile is lumpy. You can't finance a $600 million separator complex on niche contracts that renew every year or two. The bank wants a decade of floor-priced throughput, not a ribbon-cutting photo. Here's where the tech moat deepens. Ion exchange and membrane approaches promise cleaner, smaller footprints than old-school solvent extraction. University labs and national labs have pilot rigs proving separation steps on synthetic brines and AMD concentrates. The science is real, but scale is a different species. You need stable organic supply, resin lifetimes measured in years, corrosion-resistant metallurgy, and waste handling that meets NRC and EPA comfort zones when thorium shows up. None of that moves fast when communities remember broken promises. Meanwhile, timing keeps eroding value. If it takes 8 years to move from pilot to commercial, the tacit knowledge locked overseas compounds. Each cycle of undercutting resets investor confidence. Each year, a domestic plant doesn't run, the craft of tuning separation chemistry stays where it's already humming. The longer we outsource, the more we teach ourselves not to know. So what does a separator in Appalachia actually need to breathe? Feedstock within trucking distance, AMD sludge, coal ash pre-concentrates, and perhaps ionic clays from the region if they pencil out. A guaranteed offtake at a floor price for NdPr, dye, and Tb oxides that rides above the cheapest global cycles. A federal backstop on capital, not just grants on equipment. And a regulatory lane that treats reprocessing waste as cleanup plus manufacturing, not mining by another name. There's also a quiet workforce piece. Separator operators aren't generic plant hands. They're technicians who can read a phase boundary, troubleshoot a mixer-settler cascade, swap out a resin column without seeding contamination, and spot when a bleed stream is drifting off spec. Those jobs don't just appear. They're trained into existence. Community colleges and universities feeding a pipeline that stays home because the plant does. Shock number 3 is blunt. A US mine or a waste-to-concentrate stream without a US separator isn't supply security. It's a headline. Until oxides, metals, and magnets clear domestically, the battery remains disconnected. So why not just build separators here? Here's where it gets interesting. Money can't stand uncertainty, and right now, every lever, from price wars to insurance riders, pushes capital to friendlier basins. The money that won't cross the river. Stand on the bank with the spreadsheet people and watch what happens to a promising project when it tries to cross. The geology reads green. The chemistry is proven at pilot scale. The permits are inching painfully forward. Then the bankers open the model and ask one question: who's buying the output, at what price, for how long? In minerals, offtake certainty is oxygen. Without it, your revenue line wobbles with every overseas price move, and debt won't touch you. A separator in Appalachia needs contracts for NdPr, dye, Tb, floor-priced multi-year with creditworthy buyers. But domestic magnet makers are few, defense volumes are episodic, and most US manufacturers still source finished components abroad. No offtake, no bankable case. Equity might gamble for a while. Lenders won't. Insurance steps in next, and the premium tells a story. Underwriters don't insure chemistry, they insure history. Acid mine legacies in the county, add a rider. Ambiguity about who owns long-term water treatment if something shifts underground, add another. They price in SMCRA and CERCLA shadows even if your permit walls off liability. The blended cost of capital rises. A project that clears 12% IRR on paper drops below hurdle when you bolt on tail risk premiums no CFO can ignore. Then come the ESG screens. On one hand, reprocessing waste and cleaning water looks like a sustainability win. On the other, fund committees see coal ponds, gob piles and thorium flags. They read headlines, not footnotes. If your feedstock is tied to coal, some institutional capital is out before page 1. The irony is sharp. The very projects that fix yesterday's damage get filtered out by frameworks built to avoid that damage. The label overrides the math. Counties try to help, but their balance sheets are thin. A commission can create a tax increment district, maybe float a small bond backed by future site revenue, but they can't underwrite low probability, high severity risks. One derailment on a spur line, one reagent spill, one contested discharge, and the county's credit rating is suddenly in play. So they negotiate for community benefit agreements, jobs, training pipelines, school funds, while insisting that big liabilities stay far from local paper. That's prudent. It's also one more reason lenders want a federal backstop and clear carve-outs. Federal carrots are real: grants for pilots, tax credits for processing, Defense Production Act awards. They move prototypes to pilot and kickstart equipment purchases, but grants don't pay operating expenses when prices dip. They don't cover 8 months of waiting because a shipment of solvent is delayed or a lawsuit pauses your discharge permit. The OPEX cliff is where projects fall. A plant that needs a guaranteed spread between feedstock and oxide price can't live on one-time money. It needs a floor. Smart capital notices. It reroutes to friendlier geology and governance. Brines in the southwest with simpler chemistry, iron adsorption clays with fewer permitting knots, or Australia where offtake culture is mature and midstream is assembling at scale. Appalachia, by comparison, looks like an orphan, too dirty for easy capital, too strategic to ignore. The result is a trickle of venture dollars instead of the layered stack these plants require. Equity, project debt, working capital, and vendor finance aligned around stable throughput. Here's a human moment. A mid-market lender from Pittsburgh walks a reclaimed site with a hard hat and a cautious smile. He likes the team. He likes the county's enthusiasm. He has a daughter interning at an EV company that needs magnets. Back at his desk, the credit committee calls out 3 blanks: offtake flaws, insurance exclusions, and bond carve-outs for legacy liabilities. He pushes, tries to stitch together letters of intent into something firmer. The answer from buyers is polite: let us know when you're producing. The loop tightens. Vendor terms stiffen the knot. Chemical suppliers want cash guarantees because they've seen pilot schedules slip. Fabricators of mixer-settlers require milestone payments tied to permits you don't control. Logistics partners price hazmat routes like they're one accident away from a headline. Every friction dollar hits working capital. Your contingency evaporates before first product ships. Meanwhile, the price war deterrent hangs over the model. If a separator announces financing, the global market can soften oxide prices just enough to spook your covenants. Banks bake that scenario into downside cases. They've watched solar PERC lines get crushed by price waves right after commissioning. They've watched aluminium smelters blink off under power price spikes. They aren't here for another lesson. So what would pull money across the river? 3 things in writing. First, long-term, floor-priced offtakes from a blend of buyers. DoD for heavies, utilities, or OEM consortia for NDPR, and maybe a federal purchasing pool that holds inventory when prices sag. Second, a federal legacy liability backstop that walls off reminers from yesterday's coal sins, explicitly in statute or guarantee, so insurers can sharpen pencils. Third, a processing credit that triggers when global prices drop below domestic cost of service, bridging the OPEX gap without picking winners. Add a community dividend that pays out automatically based on water quality metrics and purity specs, and trust inches forward. Add transparent dashboards so a school board can see revenue in real time and local partners stop feeling like collateral. Tie workforce training to guaranteed apprenticeships at the separator, and a teenager can see a path that doesn't end with a bus ticket out. Right now, money stands on the bank doing risk math. It sees value trapped by uncertainty, time, and someone else's price lever. Until those levers are counted on paper, not in speeches, the river stays wide. And capital, being what it is, will keep choosing the easier crossing somewhere else. The waste that isn't waste. Walk along a creek in coal country after hard rain and the color tells the story. Orange film clings to rocks. The water smells metallic. That's acid mine drainage, AMD, the byproduct of oxygen, water, and exposed sulfide minerals reacting for decades after the last shift clocked out. For years, towns treated it like a forever bill, neutralized the water, scooped the iron sludge, landfilled the mess. Then researchers took a closer look and found a quiet fortune hiding in the stain. Coal's leftovers, coal ash in ponds, gob piles on hillsides, and the iron-rich solids from AMD plants aren't uniform trash. They're mineral reservoirs. In the Appalachian Basin, coal ash has tested with rare earth concentrations that outpace other U.S. regions. Some coal-related materials have clocked up to 4,100 parts per million, numbers that make engineers lean forward, because you don't have to crush rock to get there. Industry already did the grinding. Nature did the leaching. The waste is pre-processed. Now comes the chemistry that changes the ledger. AMD treatment plants already pull iron and aluminum hydroxides out of solution. Those solids trap trace rare earths. West Virginia University's team took that sludge and ran it through a two-step flow, an acid leach to liberate the elements, then solvent extraction to separate them into cleaner fractions. On skids tucked into a campus building, they proved you can make a saleable concentrate while returning cleaner water to the stream. It wasn't a press release. It was bottles and assays and a stack of lab notebooks that smelled like reagents and wet boots. This is where the triple win math gets real. First, remediation. Every gallon of AMD treated reduces metals loading downstream. Regulations count that. If you meet tighter discharge specs than the permit requires, you bank environmental benefit. Second, metals revenue. The same process that polishes water yields a concentrate of rare earths, neodymium, praseodymium, and a precious mix of heavies like dysprosium and terbium, plus potential co-products like scandium or aluminium salts, depending on the flow. Third, local water stewardship. If the plant's economics don't rely on dumping byproducts, you align incentives to keep streams clear. Scale those skids and the numbers stop being cute. Across existing waste streams in the Appalachian spine, the potential sits around 800 tons of rare earth elements a year. It won't rewrite the global ledger, but it meaningfully cuts a domestic deficit and gives the defense base a dependable slice that isn't wired to ports and politics. And unlike a single pit with a single tailings dam, this is distributed. Dozens of modest units near existing treatment outfalls, coal ash impoundments, and gob piles, each tuned to local chemistry, each feeding a regional separator by truck within a day's drive. Here's where the catch hides. Policy didn't plan for this overlap. Remediation lives under one set of rules, extraction under another. If you propose a plant whose primary purpose is water cleanup with metals as co-products, you can still be treated like a mine because you're touching legacy material. Discharge permits speak fluid dynamics. Mining permits speak overburden and pits. County solid waste rules focus on ash storage. State mining agencies focus on slope stability. Your flowsheet moves across all of it. One regulator applauds you for removing iron. Another asks how you'll bond for a spill you don't intend to make. And yet, communities see the upside in plain terms. A union welder in Mingo County points at a shop that could fabricate tanks and racks. A water authority manager runs a finger down a budget that bleeds orange and imagines a cost line replaced by a revenue split. A superintendent thinks about a vocational program where kids learn to run columns and pH probes instead of leaving for shift work 2 states away. Jobs that stay, streams that clear, tax receipts that don't vanish in 5 years. These are visible wins. But visible wins don't erase invisible costs. Hauling wet sludge is expensive if you're moving water. Smart plants dewater on site, press cakes to reduce tonnage, and ship only what holds value. Reagents cost real money, and not every county wants a warehouse of acids and organics nearby. Purity specs bite hard, too. A separator wants feed with predictable chemistry, low calcium, controlled iron loading, and trace thorium below thresholds that trip NRC comfort levels. If your upstream process wobbles, your downstream buyer discounts or pauses. There's also the rhythm of waste. AMD doesn't flow the same in August as it does in March. Coal ash impoundments vary cell to cell. Gob piles change as you dig. That demands agile operations, real-time assays, blending strategies, buffer tanks, and contracts that allow for flux without killing margins. It's industrial jazz, not just a steady drumbeat. Still, the field evidence stacks up. NETL collaborations have produced concentrates from Appalachian coal ash. University groups at Penn State and Virginia Tech have demonstrated new treatment trains that pull metals while cutting sludge volumes. DOE backed 3 first-of-a-kind pilots in the region to upgrade reconcentrations from AMD, coal ash, and byproducts. The bench-to-pilot bridge is built. The span that's missing is policy alignment and midstream capacity within a day's drive. So the idea isn't to turn every stream into a strip mall of separators. It's to map waste like an asset, permit it like cleanup plus manufacturing, and pay it like infrastructure. If the rules credit the water you clean, shield you from yesterday's sins, and guarantee a floor for the oxides you ship, the math pencils. The orange stain turns from a forever bill into a regional dividend. The chemistry works. The politics, that's the bridge we still have to build. The county line war. While the chemistry hums in the lab, the fight on the ground starts with a map. Not geology, jurisdictions. A project site can sit on private land, but the coal beneath might be held by a different owner. Surface rights, mineral rights, and sometimes even water rights peel apart like old wallpaper. Cross the county line, and the rules change again. A state mining agency interprets one clause narrowly. A neighboring county's commission reads the same clause as a welcome mat. Every mile adds a new signature you need, and a new signature someone can use to stall you. On federal land, the script shifts. The Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service expects a plan that speaks their language: surface disturbance, reclamation, cultural resources. If the project touches split estates, federal minerals under private surface, you're in 2 worlds at once. One agency asks for a plan of operations. A county zoning board asks for a conditional use permit. A federal biologist wants a survey for bats. The local road department wants to know how many trucks cross the school bus route at 3 p.m. Both can say no in different ways. Then there are tribal and historical claims. Even when the land isn't held in trust, consultation is on the table if cultural resources might be touched. A hillside that looks like spoil to an engineer might hold artifacts to a tribal historian. Without a clear playbook, projects lurch from respectful outreach to procedural confusion. Meetings are scheduled, then paused, then rescheduled with different attendees who hold different authority. Everyone agrees consultation matters. Nobody agrees when it starts or what a green light looks like. County commissions become the frontline, part court, part town hall, part triage. Commissioners weigh a tax base that could fund a new roof for the high school against letters from residents who remember the last boom bust. State agencies hover in the background with permitting clocks the county can't control, while federal reviewers ask for cumulative impact assessments that none of the locals have the budget to produce. In this maze, delay isn't just likely, it's a tactic. Here's the micro story. A company proposes a modest concentrator on reclaimed ground just outside the county seat. The site is perfect on paper, close to an AMD outfall within an industrial zone with a short spur to the highway. On a Monday morning, the sheriff parks his cruiser by the gravel lot as a handful of protesters gather: retired miners, a church deacon, 2 high school seniors, and a man with a hand-painted sign that reads, "No more experiments." Across the street, the Chamber of Commerce sets out coffee for a press conference about new jobs. The sheriff knows half of them by first name. He also knows the school district's budget shortfall and the overtime he ran last month, covering 3 calls with only 2 deputies on shift. By noon, a state agency emails the county. The project might require a modification to an existing discharge permit because the flow path changes by a few feet. That's not a veto, it's a reset. A consultant calls to say a cultural resource survey needs a wider buffer. The landowner balks at strangers with flags walking near his family cemetery. The sheriff keeps the peace, waves a trooper through, and answers a reporter's question he can't actually answer. Is this safe? He shrugs and says what he believes, if it's done right, and braces for his words to be clipped into a sound bite he didn't intend. Meanwhile, lawsuit economics move in the background. A regional NGO files a notice of intent under the Clean Water Act, focused on whether the project's geotering plan could alter a seasonal wetland that only shows up after big spring storms. They aren't trying to win the big case yet, they're buying time. The company's counsel knows the playbook. A negotiated settlement months from now might add monitoring wells and a reporting dashboard. Good ideas, honestly, but right now it freezes procurement. Vendor quotes lapse. The bond underwriter adjusts terms. A small delay becomes a budget event. Insurance riders are the quiet veto power. An underwriter reviews the evolving permit stack and adds an exclusion. Any claim tied to legacy drainage attribution is out. Another rider requires a higher deductible if a truck crosses a bridge rated below a certain tonnage, even though the county swore it would reroute heavy loads. Negotiating those terms takes weeks you don't have. Your lender asks whether the exclusions violate covenants. You're suddenly solving insurance math instead of running a plant. While that was happening in the county seat, across the line, a different commission voted to require a community benefit agreement before any project touches coal waste. Not a problem, in theory. The company planned revenue shares anyway, but the timing matters. 2 counties, 2 clocks. One wants a signed CBA before zoning. The other won't hear a zoning case until state permits clear. Each waits for the other like drivers at a 4-way stop, waving each other on while nobody moves. Trust is fragile in this landscape. One incident, a reagent spill on a rainy night, a photo of orange water taken out of context, can derail a year of careful outreach. A weekly win helps, a dashboard that shows water quality improving, a paycheck stubs wall at the Union Hall, a scholarship announcement at halftime of a Friday game. But the ledger resets fast if people feel steamrolled or surprised. That's why projects that survive here treat community as a co-signer, not a line item. In the end, the county line war isn't a single battle. It's a series of small negotiations where power is distributed and memories are long. The projects that make it through don't just clear permits. They map people, calendars, and fears with the same rigor they map chemistry. Because while the fight plays out from courthouse to culvert, 4,000 miles away, a different clock is ticking. The Geopolitical Timer. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away, a different clock is ticking. It doesn't track permits or county meetings. It tracks leverage. In Beijing, officials draft export controls with surgical precision, gallium and germanium first, a quiet reminder that midstream choke points can be weaponized without firing a shot. The message isn't subtle. Supply isn't just a market, it's a policy instrument. Rare earth magnet tech sits in that same drawer, next to a pen that can rewrite tomorrow morning's prices. Europe reads the signal and scrambles. The EU's Critical Raw Materials Act lays out targets, corridors, and a wish list of offtakes that don't depend on one country's tolerance. Brussels starts counting tons, processing capacity, and recycling loops on whiteboards that look like air traffic screens. German car makers and wind turbine giants call suppliers at odd hours, asking a quiet question. How fast can you stand up a non-Chinese source of NdPr and heavy rare earths we can certify? The answer they hear too often is a pause followed by, "We are waiting on permits." Defense planners in Washington don't have the luxury of waiting. F-35s, missile guidance fins, sonar arrays, each draws a straight line back to dysprosium for high-temperature magnets, to terbium for stability, to neodymium and praseodymium for torque. The specs aren't wishful. They're written into contracts and performance envelopes. Stockpiles can buffer shocks, but they don't build magnets at scale. The Pentagon funds pilot separators, metal plants, and early magnet lines, but volume is the problem. Warfighters need certainty, not prototypes. Sanctions risk hangs like a thunderhead. One diplomatic snap and a price can jump 300% in a week, not because the rock changed, but because the route did. Traders love volatility, manufacturers do not. Just-in-time supply chains that made sense for bolts and bearings become a liability when a single powder from a single province suddenly needs a different form, a new certificate, or a detour that adds months. Quietly, some firms start building shadow inventory, materials tucked in warehouses far from headlines, insurance policies paid in oxide instead of cash. Here's where Appalachia shows up on maps that were never meant for it. If those orange streams and ash ponds become predictable feedstock for a domestic separator, the US gains a metronome, steady beats of oxide that don't dance to someone else's tune. Not dominance, just enough stability that a price war abroad can't flip a factory plan here. Enough that allies see a flaw and start negotiating from confidence, not fear. But the timer isn't only about prices. It's about learning curves. Every day a separator runs in Inner Mongolia or Jiangxi, operators gain tacit knowledge. What happens when organics degrade at 0.3% per week in humid summers? How to tune bleed streams when calcium sneaks into an upstream tank. Those tiny lessons add up to an advantage you can't import with a crate of equipment. If Appalachia doesn't run separators now, it loses not just supply, but skill. When a crisis hits, you can't order experience on a rush shipment. Meanwhile, allies are hedging. Japan signs long-term contracts with Australian miners. Korea looks to recycling at industrial scale. Canada angles to be the friendly brine and hard rock supplier with rule of law comfort. If the US can't stand up midstream, it risks being the buyer of last resort for magnets someone else prices, or the grantmaker who funds pilots that feed foreign supply chains. That's not strategy, that's drift. The uncomfortable line is simple. Access to Appalachian feedstock equals a slice of strategic autonomy, not because it replaces imports, but because it gives negotiators a card to play. Think of a future export control on magnet alloys. If domestic oxide production is humming, with metals and magnets ramping behind it, a control is a headwind, not a cliff. If it's not, a control is a shutdown notice for lines that build the machines you need to keep promises to allies. This timer also runs through courts and corridors in DC. The Department of Energy convenes regional deploy dialogues and dangles funding. The Department of Defense signs offtakes that make CFOs exhale a little. But unless those commitments lengthen and harden into price floors, their calendar invites that expire when administrations change. Markets don't bet careers on press releases. They bet on contracts that outlive 2 election cycles. One detail will matter later: Europe's demand pull. If EU rules force carmakers to disclose magnet origin and carbon intensity, Appalachian oxides feeding a low-emission separator become premium, not just acceptable. That flips a piece of the revenue stack from discount to dividend. It also tightens the clock. Whoever certifies first writes the template others follow. Miss that window, and domestic plants spend years chasing a standard they didn't help shape. So the geopolitical timer isn't a countdown to panic. It's a metronome of opportunity and risk. Each tick is a decision: build here or source there, floor a price or pray for a cycle, teach a workforce or rent one from someone else's past. The battery under Appalachia doesn't just store potential energy, it stores bargaining power. And bargaining power, once lost, takes a generation to rebuild. The 1940s, 1990s setup, historical root cause only. To see why the battery is locked, go back to when America flipped a different switch. After World War II, industry ran hot. Steel, autos, jets, everything needed materials fast and cheap. The quiet bargain was simple: pull high-impact extraction away from neighborhoods and rivers people could vote about. If it could be sourced offshore and brought home as parts, even better. Pollution moved off the front page. Supply looked smooth. The Cold War hardened that instinct. Strategy meant missiles and microelectronics at volume. Planners wanted assured materials, but they also wanted deniability on the mess. So the US leaned on allies and peripheral suppliers for ores and concentrates, while keeping the value-adding steps that made political sense. At home, laws were written for coal and conventional mining because that's what scarred the hills. Rare earths weren't the story yet. Magnets were boutique. Silicon ruled. Meanwhile, in Asia, a long game started. China, rebuilding and industrializing, saw leverage in the midstream, chemistry, separation, and manufacturing. It wasn't about glamorous headframes. It was about vats, resins, and patience. Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, it stacked solvent extraction lines and learned the craft. Not just the equations, the minute-by-minute feel for how organics foul and how to keep impurities out of heavy rare earth cuts. By the time the West noticed, that tacit knowledge had compounding interest. Back home, a different reckoning hit. Rivers caught fire, tailings broke. In the 1970s and 1980s, Congress tightened the screws, Clean Water Act, SMCRA, communities demanded cleanups, and they were right. Regulators learned to distrust promises about temporary impacts. Bonds grew teeth. If you dug, you paid. If you polluted, you cleaned. The scars from coal wrote the rules for everything that touched a mine site. It made sense then. Through the 1990s, the World Trade Organization stitched markets tighter. Global supply chains became doctrine. Why build a middling domestic separator when you could import oxides, metals, or finished magnets at a lower sticker price? Price signals rewarded invisibility. If downstream buyers could get cheaper, they didn't ask hard questions about where acids were dumped or who held the tailings. The ledger showed savings. The liabilities lived somewhere else. Appalachia rode a different curve. Coal peaked, then ebbed. Mechanization shrank payrolls. Mines closed. Acid mine drainage kept flowing, orange and steady, into creeks nobody filmed. Counties patched budgets with fewer tools each year. There was no pivot plan for minerals beyond coal because nobody thought coal's ghosts would be feedstock. The universities kept studying the water. The plants kept treating it as a bill. This is where the lie took shape. We told ourselves security came from the cheapest source and the broadest market, that if we needed to, we could switch suppliers like changing airlines. We outsourced processing skill under the banner of efficiency and called it resilience. We passed strong environmental laws to stop fresh harm, then never updated them when waste streams turned into potential assets. We acted like midstream chemistry was plug and play and left the plug overseas. Here's the irony that bites now. The very laws that kept rivers from turning toxic again didn't anticipate cleaning a stream while recovering metals. They were built for pits and piles, not membranes and columns. They assumed extraction equals harm, full stop. So a project designed to leave a site better than it found it is forced through corridors meant for the people who did the damage in the first place. Meanwhile, the global system we celebrated for lowering costs trained an entire generation of operators somewhere else. By the late 199s, the board was set. China held separation muscle memory and magnet capacity. The US held demand, design talent, and strict rules that didn't flex. Appalachia held waste that wouldn't stop bleeding until someone paid to fix it. The price ticker said keep buying offshore. The law book said don't take chances here. And nobody wrote the chapter that said, when coal's leftovers become critical, how do we thread cleanup and extraction into one lane? History isn't an alibi, but it's a map. The choices that hid pollution, prized short-term price wins, and hardened guardrails against new harm made sense in their moment. They also built today's trap. Now the next move will decide who pays to spring it and who gets to flip the switch. The perfect storm deal that isn't. History set the board. The next move should have been simple. Line up money, permits, and a buyer, then turn the orange streams into a steady drumbeat of oxides. Instead, the deal that's supposed to unlock Appalachia keeps breaking under its own weight. Too many good ideas, each on a different clock, none sized to carry the others across. Start in Washington, where initiatives arrive like rain on tin roofs. Hubs, grants, and Defense Production Act awards splash down across the map. Good press, real dollars, serious intent. DOE seeds university consortia, funds pilot separators, and runs regional deploy dialogues to connect dots. But the funding is fragmented and short-cycle. One program covers pre-construction, another reimburses equipment, a third requires matching funds 2 quarters after a lawsuit paused site work. None of them are a 10-year promise that says, we'll buy what you make at a floor price, which is what a bank actually needs to see. States try to close the gap. West Virginia offers tax abatements and workforce dollars. Kentucky dangles industrial revenue bonds and expedited siting. Pennsylvania leans on research corridors and procurement preferences. It turns into a bidding war without a guaranteed buyer at the end, like building 3 on-ramps to a highway that hasn't been paved. Every state says the right words: critical minerals, good jobs, resilient supply. But the incentives are one-time boosts in a game that demands durable demand. Universities carry the torch where industry hesitates. Lab-scale breakthroughs walk into pilot halls. Faculty shepherd tech transfer documents that put inventions on wheels. WVU, Penn State, Virginia Tech, each proves a different piece of the flow sheet, sometimes with NETL beside them. Then they hit the valley of death, scaling beyond pilot without a customer locked in. Venture capital nods politely at metallurgy and steps back. project finance wants offtake. Offtakers want product, and the loop closes on itself again. The missing middle mile is the separator, not a benchtop cascade, not a marketing brochure, but a plant that takes feed from AMD sludges and coal ash pre-concentrates and spits out battery-grade NdPr oxide plus heavy fractions tight enough for defense. That's the node the system keeps dodging. It's expensive, finicky, and politically exposed. It also unlocks everything upstream. Without it, the waste-to-resource vision ends at a dock with a crate headed overseas. Procurement reform was supposed to help. The Pentagon signed early offtakes to anchor revenue for heavies, the hardest slice to source, better than nothing. But defense volumes are too small and too specific to finance an entire midstream. You can't run a 15,000-ton per year oxide plant on niche contracts that change with budget marks. Commercial buyers, motor makers, magnet shops say they'll come when the price stabilizes. Price stabilizes when they come. Another loop. So the perfect storm deal needs one more structural beam, a price floor that holds when global markets dip just enough to scare lenders. It doesn't have to be a giveaway. Think of it as a domestic cost of service rider, a commitment that if NdPr or dysprosium prices slide below an agreed band, a federal or pooled buyer scoops inventory into a strategic stock. When prices recover, that buyer sells back into the market. It's a buffer, not a subsidy farm. Without it, every project bakes in the fear of an undercut the quarter after ribbon cutting. Meanwhile, three other frictions keep wrecking carefully built stacks. First, timing mismatches. Grant windows don't align with permit clocks. Litigation pauses don't pause equipment delivery schedules. By the time a case settles, your quote for mixer settlers has expired and the supplier moved you to the back of the line. Second, insurance hardens terms at precisely the wrong moment, right after the first public hearing, and pushes your contingency into the red. Third, community benefit agreements get finalized late, not because locals don't care, but because nobody showed hard numbers early enough. When revenue shares and monitoring dashboards arrive as an afterthought, trust arrives late too. State competition adds noise. A metallurgical team prefers a site near Morgantown for feedstock reasons. A tax incentive in eastern Kentucky narrows the IRR gap. Pennsylvania's lab ecosystem sweetens commissioning risk. The company dithers, trying to keep three options warm. Counties sense it and stiffen asks. A month slips. Then 3, a lawyer changes a clause. A wetland buffer changes a road. The deal bleeds time. Get this, all the ingredients exist on paper. DOE pilots have proven concentrates from AMD and coal ash. States can assemble land, power, and training. The Pentagon can anchor a slice of heavies. EU rules may soon reward low-carbon, traceable magnets, an upside for Appalachian oxides tied to cleanup. Even the $15 trillion frame, the strategic value of domestic control over these supply chains, gives politicians cover to take real risk. And yet, absent a floor and a federal backstop on legacy liabilities, none of it layers into a bankable stack. There's a way to stitch it. Set a national separator network target, 3 nodes within trucking distance of Appalachia's waste streams, with synchronized funding that runs through commissioning plus 2 years of operations. Pair that with Good Samaritan shields and a federal bond backstop that walls off SMCRA ghosts. Lock in blended offtakes, DoD for heavies, OEM consortia for NdPr, with transparent, audited price floors. Require community dividends keyed to water quality metrics and product purity, paid quarterly, automatically. Make the timelines real. Build or forfeit clauses that prevent endless pre-development limbo. One county tried a version and almost pulled it off. The blueprints on a shelf. The flaw wasn't chemistry or will, it was the deal that almost, but not quite, covered the place's risk likes to hide. And when risk found daylight, the model cracked. The pilot that broke the model. They called it a cleanup plant with a metals bonus, and for a season it worked like a promise. Down a side road in a coal county that knew every layoff by name, a small AMD outfall fed into a row of tanks and columns that hummed at a human scale. The team had built it like a stack you could point to. Remediation first, metals second, community last only in the order you installed pieces. The stack design was simple, elegant, and on paper bankable. Upstream, an existing treatment pond captured the orange-laced flow. Operators dosed and settled as they always had. Except now they ran the sludge through a press that turned heavy, iron-rich cakes into a shippable feed. The skid next door handled the rest. A controlled acid leach to pull rare earths into solution, a polish to pull out the troublemakers, then a compact solvent extraction train that passed the liquor through a few well-tuned stages to deliver a mixed rare earth concentrate. The water that left the line was cleaner than permit limits by design. They won by overshooting good. Money people liked the way the revenue stacked. First came cleanup credits tied to water quality improvements, predictable, metered, and reportable on a public dashboard. Then the metals stream, modest volumes at first, but real assays from a lab that didn't belong to the project. Last was a revenue-sharing agreement. A slice flowed to a local fund that paid for welder apprenticeships, school HVAC repairs, and a county EMT van the budget couldn't cover. It wasn't charity. It was contractually hardwired. Purity and discharge met, dividend paid. Missed the mark, and the payout toggled down until the fix showed up in the numbers. The community deal was specific. Local hiring targets with a union pathway, a training pipeline with the high school VOTEC and a nearby community college. Quarterly meetings where the plant manager sat next to a water authority rep and a teacher with a ledger, and the screen on the wall showed stream pH, iron loading, and payout amounts in green or red. People who didn't trust press releases started trusting a chart that updated on Thursdays. Vendors bought in because the schedule looked real. The mixer-settler fabricators staged delivery in 3 drops. The chemical supplier priced organics with a discount tied to 3 years of volume. A resin vendor offered a pilot to commercial credit if the plant hit throughput by the second winter. Even the bond market nodded. A small tax district floated a revenue-backed note, nothing exotic, promised on cleanup credits plus a conservative metals price band. It cleared with a decent coupon. For a moment, the model looked laminated. Then a letter landed with the bland force only a federal envelope carries. Consultation required. A federal agency, looped in by a land easement nobody had thought would matter, triggered a formal review to ensure no cultural resources were at risk. Sensible, in theory. In practice, it froze the clock right when the plant needed to flip from construction to commissioning. The first consequence was subtle. A vendor's 120-day quote expired. Steel didn't get cheaper that quarter. Replacement pricing arrived with a footnote about capacity constraints and an 11% uptick. The insurance carrier read consultation as uncertainty and added a rider: any claim tied to legacy drainage attribution would be excluded unless the company bought a supplemental policy priced like a luxury car each month. The bond market noticed, too. A downgrade threat arrived unless the consultation resolved inside 90 days. Nobody could promise that. Procurement schedules unraveled. The resin vendor held the pilot to commercial credit, but pushed delivery because the plant wasn't ready to receive. The chemical supplier, now spooked by the bond wobble, asked for tighter payment terms that chewed working capital. The fabricator insisted on milestone payments linked to site acceptance tests that couldn't happen because a field team was waiting on surveyors to finish walking a wider buffer in case artifacts were present. The plant manager started each day triaging cash against a calendar he didn't control. Inside the fence, the team still believed in the flow sheet. Operators dry ran water through the train, tuned pumps, and learned the kind of lessons you can only learn at 2 a.m. when a phase boundary doesn't sit where the drawing said it would. They made tiny piles of concentrate that a lab confirmed could sell. They watched clean water numbers tick into greener zones on the dashboard. The county noticed, so did a church group that fished the creek for the first time in years. But finance is less patient than water. The downgrade turned into a cut. Insurance wouldn't flex without cash the project didn't have. The consultation stretched as agencies tried to do their job right. By the time the all-clear arrived, the plant's vendor terms had flipped from friendly to brittle, the bond coupon had stepped up, and the lender's covenant test failed on paper even though the field numbers looked better than planned. The pilot didn't explode, it just cooled. Staff hours dropped. The solvent inventory was mothballed. The community fund kept one last payout, smaller this time, then paused with a promise to resume on restart. A lesson surfaced in the quiet: integration beats innovation only if timing holds. The chemistry worked. The cleanup worked. The community deal worked. The model cracked at the seams where time, insurance, and consultation met. And once it cracked, Everything weighed more than it did the day before. The Access Protocol. So what would it take to flip the switch? For real, not a moonshot, a protocol, a lane that treats this as cleanup plus manufacturing, locks out yesterday's liabilities, and guarantees a place to sell what you make when the market dips. It starts with permits that fit the problem we are trying to solve. Call it permit light for waste reprocessing with strict water standards. Projects anchored to AMD plants, coal ash impoundments, or gob piles would operate under specialized authorization, tighter discharge caps than typical treatment plants, mandatory upstream deutering to cut haul risk, and real-time monitoring published on a public dashboard. If your primary disturbance is handling already disturbed material and returning cleaner water, you shouldn't be shoved through rules written for blasting new rock. You still clear biology surveys, cultural consultation, and stormwater plans, but on a clock, with defined scopes, known data windows, and a single lead agency to herd the cats. Miss a metric, and the permit ratchets down in hours, not months. Hit the marks, and you renew automatically. Next, wall off the ghosts. A federal legacy liability backstop, call it the remining bond guarantee, would sit on top of SMCRA-era sites. If you touch legacy coal waste under an approved cleanup plus extraction plan, your bond covers your operations, not the sins of 1979. The backstop would trigger only if a regulator determines a new project-caused release. Everything else, the forever pump obligations and Orange Creeks born before you, stays in a federal or state reclamation bucket. Insurers can price that. Banks can lend against it. Communities can breathe knowing the county won't inherit a bill it can't pay if a company folds. Now stitch the network. A strategic separator system, 3 nodes within 500 miles of the feedstock spine, gives trucks somewhere to go and operators somewhere to sell. Site them on rail where possible, near industrial water, with redundant power and cyber protection. Each node tunes to a slice of Appalachian chemistry, one optimized for AMD sludges and iron-heavy feeds, one for coal ash pre-concentrates, one flexible enough to handle blends and small-batch R&D runs. The government doesn't need to own them. It needs to anchor them, shared infrastructure grants through commissioning, and 2 years of ops, plus a requirement to accept qualifying feed at posted tolling schedules. Publish purity specs and penalties so upstream plants can design to hit the window. Floors matter. Price floor contracts turn a wish into a bankable line. Blend the buyers. Do D as the anchor for dysprosium and terbium heavies, a D-refacilitated utility, an OEM consortium for NDPR, and a federal purchasing pool with instructions to absorb oxides when global prices slide below domestic cost of service. The pool isn't a warehouse gamble. It's a buffer that buys low during undercut cycles, then releases stock when prices normalize or defense orders surge. Tie floors to transparent indices with carbon and provenance premiums baked in so European and allied buyers see value, not charity. Push trust down to the sidewalk with a community dividend that pays itself. Every permitted plant and separator would fund a local trust that auto-pays quarterly, keyed to 2 numbers: water quality improvement at the outfall and oxide purity hitting spec. If pH and metals loading stay inside tighter bands, if shipped product clears the posted purity window, the dividend triggers. Miss, and it dials down until the dashboard goes green again. The money isn't a side deal negotiated in a back room. It's in the permit and the offtake, with bank accounts and routing numbers public. Sunset clauses keep the grid from turning into a museum of almosts. Land grants, site control, and major awards arrive with build or forfeit clocks, break ground in 18 months, commission in 36, hit nameplate by 48, or the site and funds revert to a queue. Extensions exist, but they're earned, show measurable progress and third-party verification. The goal is momentum, not ribbon cuttings that stall when the cameras leave. Make transparency earned, not optional. Real-time dashboards for water, air, and payout streams. Third-party monitors from local universities and NGOs with authority to publish, not just advise. Audited offtake fulfillment and price floor activations disclosed on a 90-day lag so investors can see the buffer at work and communities can see when the government stepped in to steady prices. If everything works, nobody notices the flaw. If it trips, the notice is the point. Workforce isn't an afterthought, it's uptime insurance. Bake labor terms and training pipelines into the offtakes, union pathways where locals want them, safety metrics tied to bonuses, apprenticeships guaranteed against funded seats at community colleges, teen-to-tech programs that lead to operator badges in Year 2, shift leads in Year 5, and process engineers in Year 8. Separators run on craft as much as chemistry. Craft grows where careers do. Finally, codify speed without cutting corners. Set statutory timelines for permit-light reviews, 180 days to decision with clear stop-the-clock rules. Limit serial litigation by consolidating venue and requiring challenges to show material harm to proceed beyond an initial stay. Preserve consultation and comment, but stop the weaponization of delay. When projects clean water and make metals, time is an environmental metric too. That's the Access Protocol, a lane that rewards cleanup, neutralizes ancient risk, guarantees a buyer when the market games begin, and pays neighbors first when the numbers go green. It doesn't promise perfection, it promises traction. And in a region that's learned to distrust promises, traction is the only proof that counts. The trust equation. Even with the blueprint on paper, none of it runs without trust, not speeches, proof. In counties that lived through busted boomtowns, trust arrives in numbers you can see and checks you can cash. So the first move is earn transparency. Show the water, show the air, show the money. Picture a dashboard that isn't a PR page. It updates hourly, pulled straight from permitted sensors at the outfall and stacks. pH, conductivity, iron and aluminium loading, particulates, ammonia slip if you heat treat, green when inside the tighter cap, amber when trending, red when out. Right beside it, a ticker shows quarterly community dividends queued for payout, tied mechanically to those same metrics and to product purity at the separator. Not estimates, ledger entries with routing numbers, posted for anyone with a phone. Third-party monitors keep that honesty from becoming optional. Local universities run sampling rounds with chain of custody documented line by line. An NGO partner gets read-only access to the plant's monitoring database and the authority to publish a 48-hour variance notice if numbers drift. Their role isn't to bless, it's to verify and tell the county if something smells off, chemically or politically. The plants agree up front that independent audits will land online even if they sting, especially if they sting. Labor terms are the next lever. Safety metrics aren't a poster on a wall, they're a bonus gate. If lost time incidents exceed a threshold, executive comp ratchets down and the community dividend skims up. Supervisors get measured on training hours completed and near-miss reports filed, not just throughput. Union pathways are negotiated where locals want them, clear apprenticeships, seniority lines, craft delineations, so the workforce looks like the county and the county sees itself in the workforce. Then there's the pipeline that starts before graduation. Teen-to-tech matters because operators aren't born, they're trained. Sophomores tour the plant and watch a titration, not a slideshow. Juniors take dual credit classes, intro to separations, industrial safety, instrumentation. Seniors spend 3 afternoons a week shadowing operators, logging data, and learning why a phase boundary matters. Seats at the community college are funded and reserved. Completion earns a guaranteed apprenticeship, not a maybe next cycle. In Year 2, that apprentice is on night shift holding a column steady when the resin starts to foul. In Year 5, they're the person who knows how to keep a bleed stream from tanking a purity spec. Career paths reduce turnover. Reduced turnover makes plants safer and steadier. Steady plants keep dashboards green. Cultural memory is a force you can't ignore. People remember black water after floods, slurry impoundment warnings, and the year the mine closed 2 weeks before Christmas. Promises sound like noise until weekly wins change the soundtrack. So projects ritualize visible proof. Friday updates at the high school gym, stream graphs on a screen, hiring stats by zip code, purchase orders for local shops, and the next quarter's dividend forecast. The plant manager takes questions in front of their neighbors. When a pump fails and a number blips, they explain it in plain words and point to the fix on Monday, not a month later. The point isn't perfection, it's responsiveness. Narrative shifts when neighbors benefit first and fast. A stewardship frame only works if money lands predictably in places people care about. the volunteer fire department's radios, the bus fleet's brakes, a STEM lab that smells like solder and ambition. Tie those to metrics. If dissolved metals at the outfall stay inside the tight band for 90 days, the school gets the lab order. If NdPr purity clears the posted window for a quarter, the firehouse gets the radios. Miss the band, delay the spend. Everyone can trace the line from clean water to local gear. Here's where it gets uncomfortable but necessary. Complaint handling with teeth. A hotline that routes to a voicemail is an insult. Real trust means a 24/7 line staffed by humans with authority to dispatch a sampler, pause a truck route, or call the plant manager out of bed. Every complaint becomes a ticket with timestamps, findings, and outcomes posted in a weekly log. If 5 tickets flag trucks at 6 a.m. near the elementary school, the route changes or the plant pays a penalty into the dividend fund that week. The fix is visible by the next school day. Financial transparency seals the loop. Offtake fulfillment, price floor activations, and federal buffer buys get published on a 90-day lag, volumes, prices within indexed bands, and any draws on the floor. Investors see predictability, citizens see when the government stepped in to steady a price, why it happened, and how much it cost. Secrecy breeds rumors. Rumors breed opposition. Sunlight keeps both small. None of this erases risk. It redistributes it with consent. When people can see the water improve, watch paychecks seed careers, and verify that dividends rise and fall with the same numbers regulators watch, suspicion softens into scrutiny, and scrutiny is healthy. The access protocol moves gear. The trust equation moves people. And people, not permits, decide which projects survive the first rumor, the first storm, and the first bad day. Who loses if Appalachia wins? Start with the people who have learned to love the current maze. If Appalachia stands up feedstock, separation, metals, and magnets, the first losers are incumbents who profit from distance and dependence. Overseas magnet makers built empires on predictable tolls and opaque premiums. Traders skim spreads on every ocean crossing, concentrate to oxides, oxides to metals, metals to magnets. Each hop a fee, each delay a markup. A domestic midstream slices those layers and their margins. Processing hubs abroad would feel the pinch next. When a US separator puts out tight-spec NdPr, dye, and TB with provenance and carbon accounting, buyers gain leverage. The old play, bundling access with conditions, nudging delivery windows to shape price, is weaker when a truck from Logan County can beat a container through a clogged port. Plants that once set the rules for impurities and timing now face customers who can walk. Then come the quiet middlemen. Commodity index compilers and benchmark publishers who thrive on volatility lose some sizzle when a domestic floor mutes price whiplash. So do financial players who built structured trades around undercuts timed to Western financing announcements. A floor plus a purchasing pool blunts those ambushes. Less drama, fewer windfall trades. Domestically, some manufacturers will grumble. For years, they've quoted products built on imported magnets priced at the mercy of faraway cycles. A homegrown magnet supply with traceability and environmental premiums may land a few percentage points higher, at least early on. Margins compress unless they pass costs through. The states hosting those plants will fight price adjustments. States without the new jobs will ask why they're paying more. That's the politics. Who gets payrolls versus who gets markups. Importers of cheap assemblies lose their edge too. If federal procurement and allied OEMs start valuing clean, domestic content, the low-road strategy, cheap magnet inside a pricey system, gets called out. Disclosure rules make it visible. Preference policies make it costly. Some firms will reinvent, others will lawyer up. Internationally, expect pushback shaped like rules. A WTO complaint here, an anti-subsidy probe there. If the US runs a price floor or a purchasing pool, somebody will call it distortion. Allies who benefit from transparent, resilient supply chains will whisper support in private, then measure whether it's safe to say it out loud. Rivals will recruit legal arguments to slow the build, even as they quietly fortify their own walls. And not all the resistance flies a flag. Sabotage has 1,000 suits, a price wave timed to a commissioning schedule, a dump of underspec bargains to clog domestic QA labs, lobbyists swarming statehouses to redefine mining so waste reprocessing falls into the harshest box. Lawsuits filed in friendly venues the week a bond goes to market. Insurance whispers that raise deductibles when a county needs a signature. None of this looks like a headline, it looks like friction. It works by making time expensive. There's an uncomfortable group on the losing side, firms inside the US that never modernized. If separators demand consistent inputs and traceable outputs, suppliers who can't meet specs get left behind. Some scrap handlers and recyclers will need to clean up their act or lose contracts. It's a necessary cull, but it stings where margins are thin. So what's the counter? Build a coalition that spans uniforms, turbines, and school boards. Defense brings urgency and anchor demand for heavies. Clean tech brings volume for NDPR and a public that understands why provenance and carbon count. Coal country brings land, labor, and a need that nobody else can credibly dismiss. Together, they can hold the line when price pressure arrives, testify when lawsuits frame flaws as gifts, and show the dashboard that proves water runs clearer while checks clear on Fridays. Give that coalition receipts. Publish the price floor activations, not as secrets, but as policy doing its job. Show the export control risk next to domestic uptime. When an undercut hits, let county commissioners explain why the plant didn't blink, because the floor caught the fall. When a lobby pushes a bill to redefine waste reprocessing as new mining, let union workers and water managers sit shoulder to shoulder and say what would happen to their paychecks and creeks. There's a human edge to this, too. The sheriff from earlier still has to answer questions after church. A magnet shop in the Midwest has to explain to a customer why their quote is steadier now, but a hair higher. A wind farm OEM has to tell a board that a domestic premium buys fewer nightmares. If the coalition arms them with facts, not vibes, they can win rooms where deals actually die. One more thing, don't promise no losers. Promise visible wins that are bigger than the losses. Cleaner water posted on a phone. Apprentices converted to journeymen. A magnet line hiring from a county that used to export kids. A defense plant receiving heavies without a middleman's delay. And the quiet power to say no when a foreign lever tries to pull a domestic switch. If Appalachia wins, some empires shrink, some habits end, but the loss that matters most isn't to a balance sheet overseas. It's the loss of a story we told ourselves, that the cheapest, farthest source was always the smartest bet. Replace that with a story that pays neighbors first, teaches a craft we forgot, and puts the switch inside reach. That's worth the noise that follows. The switch-on scenario. Now play the tape forward 5 years with the access protocol in place and the trust equation working. The first separator hums near a rail spur, tuned for AMD sludges. 6 months later, its sister plant dials in coal ash blends. A third node comes online to flex between feeds. Trucks roll short hops from treatment sites, dashboards show cleaner creeks, then purchase orders. Year 1 is commissioning and muscle memory. Operators learn how organics age through a humid July, how to trim a bleed when calcium sneaks past pre-treatment. By the second winter, uptime climbs and scrap shrinks. Purity windows stop being a guess. Contracts that once felt aspirational turn into routine pallets out the door. NDPR oxide meeting spec, dysprosium and terbium fractions allocated first to defense, then to allies under traceable terms. By year 3, domestic midstream capacity quietly crosses a line, call it 10 to 15% of national need for oxides, with magnets ramping behind. Not dominance, but a cushion. Price volatility that once bullied factory plans now hits a floor. When an undercut wave arrives from abroad, the purchasing pool clocks in, scoops inventory, and posts its moves on a 90-day lag. Banks don't flinch. Covenants hold. Plants stay lit. Jobs map across the spine like a new vein of light. Separator shifts in Huntington and Johnstown. Remediation crews in McDowell County and Greene County. Fabricators in shops that once welded dragline parts, now building columns and racks. Logistics runs predictable hazmat routes on upgraded spurs and hardened river locks. High school apprentices turn into night shift operators, then trainers. A few head to engineering programs and come back. The grid and storage picture changes tone. Motor makers pilot PM lines that sip Appalachian NDFB. LFP battery plants sign blends with traceable carbon and water credits baked in. Wind OEMs write specs around domestically assured magnets, fewer surprises in winter lead times. None of this shows up as fireworks. It shows up as fewer Friday calls that start with bad news. Water outcomes sit in plain view. AMD cites that once drained budgets start penciling small surpluses. A trout group posts photos from stretches they'd written off. Counties redirect general fund money from emergency pumping to school roofs and ambulance fleets. The orange that stained rocks becomes a line item called dividend, audited, argued over, and expected. And then there's the quiet power. Export controls land somewhere overseas, diplomats trade statements. Plants here check solvent levels and keep running. A partner nation calls asking for a tranche of heavies under the reciprocal access clause signed last spring. The answer is yes, with a paper trail every inspector can follow. Leverage shifts by degrees, not by speeches. Risk didn't vanish, it moved where you can see it. Reagent supply gets dual-sourced. Cyber drills run quarterly. Stockpiles rotate on a schedule that production planners can read. When a truck tips a tote on a back road, the hotline rings, the route changes, a fine auto-pays into the dividend that week, and the dashboard logs the fix in daylight. Trust doesn't spike, it compounds. The switch on isn't a single click. It's a metronome settling into time. Plants hit nameplate, communities hit payout, buyers hit reorder without a pit in their stomach. And the story Appalachia tells itself shifts from the place that powered the last century and paid the cleanup bill to the place that tuned a messy inheritance into a steady current everyone can count on. The new choke points. We switch the battery on, but current has to move through wires, and wires can pinch. The first new choke point isn't exotic, it's chemistry in drums. Separators live on acids, organics, and specialty resins. Hydrochloric and nitric are the blunt tools. The finesse comes from extractants, diluents, modifiers, and ion exchange media with finicky lead times. If a single supplier misses a boat or a domestic plant schedules a turnaround during peak demand, your carefully tuned cascade turns into a waiting room. Dual sourcing isn't nice to have, it's oxygen. But qualifying second sources takes months of validation because a 1% change in viscosity at summer temperatures can nudge a phase boundary into mischief. Then there's the resin problem. The columns that polish feeds and catch strays rely on narrowly spec'd beads. A shipment with off-size distribution means higher pressure drops, different residence times, and early fouling. You can brute force a day, you can't brute force a quarter. Build domestic capacity for these consumables and keep safety stock within a day's drive. Publish reorder points like you publish water data. If one plant hiccups, another can lend a pallet and settle up by Friday. It's a supply covenant you make with your neighbors. Waste doesn't vanish because we're mining the waste. If you pull rees out, you still push something out the back. Iron cakes, aluminium salts, gypsum, and depending on the feed, tails with trace radionuclides from thorium and uranium. None of it surprises the textbooks, but it can surprise a county that's never seen an NRC form. If you don't design for it, waste of waste becomes the headline that eats your Sunday. The fix is in the flow sheet and the logistics. Segregate tails by hazard profile, stabilize what needs cement, recycle what can go back into products, like using iron oxide as pigment or cement additive with clear specs, and lock disposal routes with hardened, inspected sites and contracts that survive a price dip. Carbon matters too. We earned a premium by pairing cleanup with metals. Blow that by trucking water, overusing energy, or shipping intermediates in circles, and the ESG math flips on you. Plants that win this next round will meter energy like they meter pH, capture low-grade heat for pretreatment, route trucks on the shortest, safest paths, and publish the carbon per kilogram of oxide. When Europe asks for life cycle numbers, the answer is already online, audited, dull, and unarguable. Cyberphysical is the choke point nobody in coal country grew up fearing. A separator is a chemistry set married to a SCADA screen. If a bad actor nudges set points by half a degree or fakes a pH signal, purity falls off a cliff before a human smells it. The counter isn't paranoia, it's drills and design. Egap the critical loops, run red team exercises quarterly, require multi-factor on setpoint changes, and give operators analog fallbacks they actually practice at 2 a.m. The goal isn't to be unhackable. It's to be resilient when the alarms all light up at once. Transportation will pinch where maps forgot industry. Some of the best AMD sites sit at the end of roads built for pickups, not pressgate trucks. Rail spurs rusted when the last tipple closed. River locks hum along at capacities nobody's updated since the 80s. You can fix this the cheap way, permit by permit waivers, a patched bridge here, an overweight variance there, or you can treat it like the grid it is. Design hazmat routes with the sheriff at the table. Upgrade 2 spurs per county on the spine and publish the timetable. Harden 3 locks and cut a week of dwell from a dozen plants at once. The money you don't spend on track breakdowns buys you one less angry town hall. Community veto isn't a speech, it's a fuse. Trust compounds slowly, but it blows in a flash. A single sloppy delivery of reagents, a contractor who shortcuts a tarp on a windy day, a slow response to a fish kill upstream that wasn't even yours. Each becomes a story that outruns your dashboard. The only play is muscle memory for bad days. When a tote tips, the hotline rings a real human. The route pauses, the road gets washed, the fine auto pays, and the manager stands in the cafeteria at noon with photos and a plan. Do that 3 times well, and the 4th time someone gives you a day before posting a rumor. Blow it once, and you're back to hearings where nothing moves. Resilience is the loop that closes all these gaps. Stockpiles aren't hoarding, they're uptime. Hold 60 days of critical reagents regionally under shared keys with audit trails. Cross-train operators so a plant that loses a shift to the flu doesn't drop purity. Run tabletop drills, cyber, spill, bridge out, protest at dawn with county partners, and publish after-action notes. Codify dual sourcing for everything that touches a column. And give locals real veto power on expansions via pre-agreed triggers. Miss the water band for 14 days, and your next throughput hike freezes for a quarter. It sounds like a break. It's actually a license to run fast the other 351 days. We started with a locked battery, then we built a living grid. New choke points will keep appearing because systems that matter attract pressure. The test isn't avoiding pressure, it's building a rhythm that absorbs it without losing the beat. The meaning and the ask. Unlocking Appalachia turns a liability into leverage, the power to steady prices, clean water, and train a workforce that owns tomorrow's craft. If you want the next chapter, the Mississippi's hidden plug, and the river that could bankrupt America, watch the investigation queued up now. Subscribe, share this with someone who thinks minerals are elsewhere, and hit the bell so you don't miss the counties that flip the switch next.